It's time for the Buffalo Plus podcast.
Allen again rolls on the move, lets it fly. Oh, Diggs! Oh, what a catch!
Welcome back to the Buffalo Plus podcast presented by Connors and Ferris, Mike Catalana, Dan Fates. I'm Jenna Cottrell. This week, we're going to be tackling the Bills. Is it a coaching issue? Is it a roster issue? Who is to blame and what big decisions the Bills have ahead? Tremaine Edmunds, Jordan Poyer, just to name a few, and what the Bills' options are and what they should consider doing. All right, Mike, we are in full offseason mode. I know a lot of Bills fans not exactly pleased about that, but we take a step back at what the season was, and we know the Bills did not achieve what we were expecting them to do. Do you think it is more so the coaches not putting players in the correct position, or do you think it's the players not being talented enough? Or what do you make of where they are at right now?
Everybody is at fault here, and I am not absolving Brandon Beane. It's not a total roster issue, but the roster is not good enough. Were the coaches up to it? No. We can find many examples of where, especially at the coordinator level, they didn't emphasize the talent that they had. Because let's stop pretending this roster is not a top 5 roster or wherever number you want to put them at. And injuries played a part of that. And then it's, obviously some is on the players themselves. There's some great players on this roster. There's guys that didn't hold up. So my only thought is it's not a cop-out to say it's everything. I put roster number 1. I just don't think it's an elite roster, and we can blame coaches, and there's plenty to go around. But Dan, I say it starts with the type of player and the level of player they have on the roster.
I've calmed down a little bit since the game. Obviously, you talk about like you have that initial emotion, and that's part of why that our post-game podcast that we do on the drive home is so great, because it is just your guttural reaction to that was terrible, this is awful, what's going on. But after watching that Bengals and Chiefs game, Mike, I was before the game, after the Bills lost, I was 75% of the blame should go on the coaching staff and the coordinators and 25 on the players. And I am much more 50-50, if not a little bit more on the player's side being at fault, because at some point you got to make plays. Like, you just have to make plays. And I'm sitting there, and you saw the Bengals and Chiefs, while both teams made adjustments, like, you saw the beginning of that game and you went, wow, the Chiefs are going to get a dozen sacks on Joe Burrow. And the Bengals made adjustments. They went to max protection. Like, that's a good schematic adjustment. And I'm looking at that and I go, Ken Dorsey, I don't know why I thought that he would make adjustments in the playoffs when he didn't make adjustments all season long. So my feeling hasn't changed on what Ken Dorsey is, but I'm with you, Mike, that like this roster just wasn't good enough. The Chiefs had so many backups and rookies playing, and they were fine. They were fine because they found ways to make plays. And I just never saw enough Bills players this year make enough plays.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I agree with you guys. Like, the truth between the matter is usually in the middle. Like, both sides are at fault. But I felt like it was very indicative of where Brandon Beane was kind of at his end of the year press conference, by the tone in which it not being the usual, like, yeah, guys, we came up just short, but we're going to make some minor adjustments. It was more of a, very close to the vest type of feel, because he, I think, feels that pressure because of the roster. And it's really interesting what he said, because he was like, you can't base your entire season and the results off of the way the last game went, because we really haven't been blown out of the gym in many circumstances. So I take that and I say, well, you can go back a lot further, and maybe you weren't getting blown out of the gym because obviously you had so many wins this season, but every game was so they really struggled to close teams out, bad teams. And it's like, this team, look, you can't expect going into the season you're going to have Micah Hyde go down and Von Miller. But at the same point, that injuries are a part. You just don't know which players are going to end up injured. But I felt like that was very telling when he's like, you can't let this Bengals loss kind of simmer in your mind like that. But it's like, this team was barely good enough all season long.
Yeah.
Right, Mike?
You're right, Jenna. It's funny. Don't tell me why, but I was looking at the Vikings Bills game. My wife's away. I had too much time on my hands. Uh, that game was so strange, but they made so many mistakes in that game. And we all know they should have won. It should have ended up as a win. But I
Yeah.
was watching it looking for something specific, and I just kept seeing interceptions or near interceptions or fumbles or letting an 80-yard run go by. And I'm like, wow, this team, like, where were they? And we had so much of that this year. And when I put it all on the roster, I say, not all on the roster, but a lot on the roster, I say to myself, are these guys you're going to continue to go with? Meaning, like, we thought guys would step up. So
Yeah.
when I look at Gabe Davis, I'm like, is that a mistake by coaching of not putting him in the right spot? Is that a mistake? Is that Gabe? Did he not step up? Is it on Brandon Beane for thinking that he's good enough to be in that 2 spot? That's why I say it's a combination of things. But when I take a step back and I look, and Dan, you're saying like guys aren't making plays. Again, some of that is maybe it's not the right guys or not enough of them.
Agreed.
And I know people are probably putting it in the comments now when they watch this. They were decimated by injuries this year on the defensive side. I mean, it was a weekly thing where guys were either out or you didn't know. I kept joking that the pregame 90 minutes when they're announcing who's active, it used to be the 5th wide receiver. Now it's like, oh, is Milano playing? Is Edmonds playing? Is Poyer playing? Like, it was real, and you lost Vaughn and Hyde for the year. So, but none of that matters now. Now it's like, okay, who's back? Who's going to be healthy? Who do they want back? And try to make it work. That's when you then get into, are these the right coaches to make it work? And we keep hearing about maybe Leslie Frazier. There could be some changes. I guess that could happen. I know it seems to me, Dan, that when I hear from fans, they want Leslie gone. And I think they're willing, it sounds like many of them are willing to give Dorsey more leverage, more leeway. And
I'm
I
the
don't know if I see that.
I'm the exact opposite. I
Yeah.
think if there is,
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
I think if there is, an excuse to go around, you can look at Leslie Frazier and say, man, he was playing shorthanded. Like he didn't get the resources. And I'm saying that knowing Von Miller was out, Micah Hyde was out, cornerstones for that team on that side of the ball were either out or injured or missed significant time and still put together a pretty productive defense. Now, again, we can go back to this, chicken or the egg thing first, because the fact of the matter is that was it the defensive line, the talent, or was it the scheme that they were in? But I looked at that Ken Dorsey game and I just said, the fact was they had all their guys. There was no real excuse on that offensive side of the ball to say, well, they didn't have blank. They had everything. So to me, again, and that's I can't remember where we talked about it, guys. I don't think maybe it was the recap show that Mike and I did on the Thursday after the season. But the fact of the matter was, we joked around that Beane kind of sounded a little defensive in his end of the year press conference, and it was a lot of like, well, he's a first year guy, like give him a break. It's like, give him a break. Like, you hired him knowing he was a first year guy, but wanted to keep him because of the familiarity, and the familiarity did not trump the rookie coordinator position. That outweighed the familiarity. So this thought of, well, you just, give him another shot. It's like, why? For what? What did Ken Dorsey do? And Beane will say, look, we did a lot of good things and all that stuff. I don't know. I'm way more move on from Dorsey than move on from Frazier.
Okay, so you bring that up, and I feel like a lot of people echo that as well, of this, just the frustrations, and it is interesting because you look at the stats, and like the Bills did score more points this season, but it just felt so different, as we all know.
Open your eyes. Watch
Yeah,
the
no, I agree. Like, I think it's one of those things where maybe they didn't score as many points last year, but just the ease in which everything was. And I felt like this year was so dependent on, and we've talked about this, just Allen having to be outstanding. Allen having to put the team on his back. And when he's the best player on the field, you expect him to play the best. But at the same point, every single week, the expectations of that, like, you're going to be disappointed at certain moments, because that's just how life works. But Dan, you talk about moving on from Dorsey. Like, what do you do then? Like, you'll have another offensive play caller in the building. You'll have another offense, Josh. Like there's. I'm not saying you keep Dorsey because well he's just been there, but at the same point, where this team is at and where they want to go, like this is a huge window for this team. And is it, do you think, beneficial for them to change an offensive coordinator, knowing that they don't knowing the changes that would come?
Yeah. Like the repercussions of
Yeah.
making the change. Yeah. No.
Just
no,
because you
it's
have
good
a new
point.
offensive coordinator doesn't mean he's better than Ken Dorsey.
Correct.
Doesn't mean he's worse, but there's obviously
Correct.
the
And like I said,
gamble.
to me, I'm okay with bucking the trend a little bit of this familiarity of, oh, he's been around. He knows this guy. Like, I would rather have a guy, I've joked around with you guys, somebody that's had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay. Like that's where I'm at, because I lacked the creativity. I lacked, seeing a design from Ken Dorsey. Dan Orlovsky did a great breakdown on what the Chiefs did against the Bills. And it was one of those things I was like, man, the Bills had played, in theory, decent defense. The Bengals just had every single answer to the test that the Bills were going to throw at them. And I went there and I went, man, that was really cool to see the Bengals go into a game going, hey, we're probably going to see zone because, you can't go man-to-man against the Bengals skill position player. So you're going to see zone. And here are 5 plays and 6 concepts that we're going to use to beat zone. I never saw that once going into a game for the Bills of, hey, if we see this, we're going to do that. It was a whole lot of, man, let's try and see if we can slog our way down the field. Let's see if Josh can throw it 50 yards. I just never saw that, Mike.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the plan. I think what it was they believe that when Josh gets those coverages, they're going to let it go. And, that is and teams started to give them that. Like, we're going to take the cheese away, as you like to say, and we're going to say, go ahead, let's see what you can do. And you keep trying that. It's a low percentage type offense. And I think they had that. Jenna, I want to go back to when I was talking about the rosters. And this is why I'm more on it. If I'm on either coordinator's side, it would be Leslie Frazier. That wasn't the Bills defense that was out there by the end of the year.
Yep.
Between injuries, even, I mean, let's be honest, Jordan Poyer wasn't healthy. We know that.
Yeah.
That was
Dude
the
is a
starting
warrior.
offense. It was the starting offense, right? Was anybody, am I missing something? Who wasn't on the field at the end of the year? They were all there, right? So, and they were terrible. And last year in the playoffs, because, I don't want to forget the Bills had a bad stretch of offense late in the year. And they ended up getting to 7-6, and we know what happened. And we thought they found something in Tampa, and then they made some plays, and then they were explosive in the playoffs last year. And that's what gives you hope, because you're like, this is what they can be. And then Daboll leaves, and they make these moves that looked okay on paper because you thought a guy coming off 4 touchdowns in a playoff game was going to elevate. I mean, that's not a big stretch to be saying, oh, look at who's given he's the Chicago Bulls security guy over
seriously.
there. If you're just listening to this, Dan's given the shrug because Dan was anti-gay, but that's not it. Not anti-gay. That's unfair.
That's not it.
He's not anti-gay. It's anti-thinking that he's going to be this week in, week out. And I got to say for you, that's coming off one of the greatest games. I mean, I saw Jerry Rice at the Eagles game this week. Like, Jerry Rice didn't have a game like Gabe did. But Dan was like, I don't know if he's that number 2 guy. So, look, I am a fan of Brandon Beane. This is probably coming out to people like I'm ripping him. General managers have, a bit of an issue sometimes. And I think with Brandon, it's like he has built a really good team. But then it's making those moves around Josh Allen, all those kind of things. And, look, forgive me again, I'm going to mention the Eagles, but only because they're playing. Howie Roseman has been celebrated, vilified, moved to the back of the building, brought back, built a Super Bowl team, had it fall apart on him because of Carson Wentz, and build it back up again. Yeah. I mean, any fan, you look at the Eagles now, it's all working. But, man, there were times when it was like a mess. And this happens. It's hard to be a general manager. It's hard to
Drafting Jalen Reagor.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Draft Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson.
Yeah,
but by the way, now they end up with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown.
That's what I said. It's like I said, it's forgotten when you hit.
And by the way, Howie is so lethal he makes stupid mistakes like they didn't draft Seattle wide receiver, big guy,
DK?
DK. And they ended up drafting a wide receiver out of Cal who was a stiff. He was terrible. He never did anything. He ends up trading him to Seattle. So he's like, puts him on Seattle after his bad move. He's like, I'm in such a good spot now. I'm going to send that guy to Seattle. And where does he send Jalen Reagor? He sends him to Minnesota. It's almost like, yeah, you can have both of these guys. I screwed up. You take them. I'm going to go with AJ and Devontae. My point was Brandon Beane has done 85% of what he's done is really strong. The last two drafts, now it's hard to count this past year's draft. They're rookies. Well, you want to go back more, but certainly the last two. I mean, Greg Rousseau, we think is that kind of player, but you got to get impact out of these guys. Spencer Brown. I mean, you're thinking he's a starter. Is he a starter in this league?
I just want to finish one point on this because we're kind of zigzagging, but Jenny, you had said like, what are the repercussions? Excuse me, if you were to move on from Dorsey. And I remember saying it was tough to give the keys to this Ferrari to a guy with a learner's permit. Like I had said that several times. Like that was my big fear was that and guess what? He's stalling out the clutch. He doesn't understand traffic signals. And all of a sudden he's in a traffic jam and things aren't good. My point is it's not the exact person. Like we hinted at it after the game, like Frank Reich would have been a really interesting case to make. Obviously now he's a head coach in Carolina. Yes, I understand that. And the name isn't exactly right, but I guess what I wished for, and I don't know if it's possible anymore, but the fact of like a proven offensive coordinator, somebody that has called plays in multiple systems, that has his own philosophies. My analogy last year was it's not the right person because I think he's a terrible head coach, but a decent coordinator. It would be like a Norv Turner, like a guy that had been around the block that could sit Josh down and say, hey, listen, you've got unreal talent. I've got a great scheme that has worked. Just listen to me. And I feel like there's not that there, whether it's the accountability like we have talked about with Dorsey and Allen or one thing or another, it just is lackluster for me. So what is the repercussions? Well, it's starting over. But I'm kind of okay with starting over. And I understand the points per game, but I would rather start over and see something that actually had concepts, plays, principles, designs, because I didn't see any of that.
Yeah.
Jenna, I think the Bengals and the Chiefs are fascinating examples of this because the Bengals have a great offensive roster in terms of skill position players for their quarterback. The Chiefs have had that and then don't. And Mahomes still makes plays, but he also has probably the greatest play caller, play designer in the history of the league in Andy Reid. So you can go either way. And to Dan's analogy about driving, Jenna, you're a better driver now, maybe, than you were with old Bessie to you are with your fancy new ride now, right?
Jenna did get a new car.
I got a new car, guys.
But what I'm saying is to Dan say, that's why I say you love to blame Dorsey because it's easy to say, that's the coordinator. And there were certainly issues. The players aren't good enough. The line is not good enough at all.
You asked Josh to do everything.
They do. Dan, what was it? Third down. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah. The only thing I disagree with there is that the coaches are supposed to continue to develop those players. So
there's development. No, that's two different things. That's position coaches developing, and then it's coordinators
but it's putting them in the right spots too. Like Dable pushed the right. And we got 18 minutes into this podcast before I brought up my best friend Brian Dable. But the fact is that like he put those guys into situations where they could be successful. And for the longest time, for the beginning of this year, Dawson Knox didn't do anything. And people were showing his route trees and what he ran compared to last year to this year. And they were completely different. Like,
yeah, he also wasn't
had to block
pass plays because they had a lousy offensive line and needed help. And Gabe Davis dropped balls in the end zone. He's in the right spot. You got to make the catch. I'm saying it's give him better play. Give Josh Allen, give Ken Dorsey, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, and those guys on offense, and Tyler Boyd, and I think he'd be a play caller. Better play. Doesn't mean he'd be as good as you want him to be, right? There may be a ceiling on that, but there is something about You say players making plays, Jenna. You need those players. They got to go
Yeah.
get them for you.
No, I completely agree. But I get you always make fun of me for saying I'm in the middle.
Well, that's
And I
okay
get
to be
why,
in the
because I'm
middle.
always in the middle. But like, this is a perfect example where I believe that like the players weren't good enough, and neither was the play calling.
You're
Like
right.
both sides, you wanted to see more creativity. You wanted to see them utilize their guys, and then you also wanted to see players earlier on in the season, like a Gabe Davis and like a Dawson Knox. Knox had a great end of the season, but you wanted to see more consistency throughout the year as well.
Jenna, real quick, all I would say to somebody is, and to Dan even too, when you talk about the coordinator, fire the coordinator, bring in Kyle Shanahan, bring in whoever you think is, the great play caller in the NFL. Sean McVay, bring him in and say,
Yeah.
okay, this is your roster, because Kyle Shanahan's a lot better play caller when he's got Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
That's what I
Debo
mean.
and yeah.
Then it's way more effective in that way. So as good as they are, Sean McVay, Odell Beckham made a huge difference to him when they brought in the other guy. I mean, that's the only point I was making with it's a combination. Jenna, it's okay to be in the middle. I think that's the smart place to be.
Well,
Kyle
I
Shanahan
I
went
see fault on
undefeated
both
with Brock Purdy.
sides. Huh?
Kyle Shanahan made Brock Purdy look really good.
He made him look reasonable.
game
Like in the
manager.
playoffs, I know he didn't play in the Eagles game because he got hurt. And he
Yeah.
was very, very mediocre against the Cowboys, and Dallas probably should have won that game. He's Brock Purdy. So they kept him from the offense falling apart. They
Yeah.
weren't exactly a dynamic offense, but he's a pretty good play caller, but he's got the guys around him.
I think they were dynamic, but it was Brock Purdy being a game manager and letting the playmakers really step up when they
They
needed
got some
to.
pretty good playmakers on that team.
Yeah, they definitely do. All right, I wanted to talk about too, because we talk about players and the defensive line. They have sunk so much capital, whether it be actual money, signing free agents, draft picks, and it's still Von Miller going out, huge piece of that. But at the same point, they just have consistently not gotten enough out of that position. And they've spent a lot of money. Dan, or Mike, what did they do? Because it hasn't worked in the way that they've wanted it to. I mean, Ed Oliver, obviously, I think he's shown signs of progress, but you wanted him to be more of a game wrecker. You want to see Greg Rousseau continue to take those steps. But what about guys like Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa? I mean, you've just spent so much money. You signed Jordan Phillips, who obviously was dealing with some injuries, but Shaq Lawson as well. You talk about the Chiefs and the Bengals, and you see that they have great offensive and defensive lines, but Bengals tried to rebuild and had injuries.
Yeah.
But Mike, that's not working.
No, it's not. It's not. And what I always think of is impactful players, right? Everybody doesn't have to put up huge numbers.
Yeah.
And I think there's a hope that Ed Oliver is that guy, and we see flashes of it. But come on, your number one pick, top 10 pick. And now he's going into the 5th year of his contract. It's not that Ed's not a good football player. Is he a good football player for what you paid him and what you need to do going forward? Not good.
Yeah.
It's got to be great. If you're going to give him a big deal, he's got to be that guy all the time. I'm still on board with Greg Rousseau. I think he's still, I'll use the Tremaine thing, a young player. I think he's got ability. I think he's the type of player you want. But, Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa are guys, if you drafted them in the 5th round, you'd say, okay, they're good rotational guys. They can make a few plays and whatever. I mean, you drafted them in the 2nd round. You drafted them high, both of them. Epinesa was your first pick that year.
Yeah.
And they've changed defensive line coaches. Things have changed with this team. And when they needed them the most, they were non-existent in the biggest game. And that's not overreacting to that game. Dan, they came into this season saying, we don't have enough there. We've spent all this. We need a closer. I still love the Von Miller signing for what he brings you. And then he got hurt. You can't, I don't care what his age is. You can't plan for that. His injury could have happened to anybody. But that told you at that moment, they knew they didn't have enough there.
Yeah. Von covered bandages of that defensive line and covered up some wounds that Brandon Beane had. But we saw it over the last 5 weeks. They didn't have a single player in the top 40 of pass rush win rate, which is just pathetic. The The problem is, and I don't mean to take this question a different way, Jenna, but talk about like, what do you do? I think you just have to kick the can down the road. Like, honestly, like in the sense of like where this roster is. And I've joked that you can throw a dart at this roster and it'll hit something. And you can say that group, that position room needs to be improved.
Yeah.
I think they got major issues other places. Like, I really think that like this could be just a rolling the ball back out there with this same defensive line and hoping for a different result, because you hope that Von comes back. He talks about that he expects to be ready to go at training camp. I thought Brandon Beane made a good point talking about that, the sense that, well, Trey White tore his and it took him a full year. Von's going to try and come back in like 8 months. And Beane did say that that was Trey's first ever major injury, which is something I didn't factor into the oil change. I didn't know that it was the first oil change that he'd ever had. So like because Von's treating this, I'm not going to say it, but Von's, he's gone through this, so he kind of knows what to expect, a lot of those things. But I just think where I'm looking at, like, where can you improve, this defensive line? I kind of shrug again, because I think that there are much bigger fish to fry elsewhere, especially on offense.
Yeah. Well, hold on.
Chris Joneses don't grow on trees.
Before I get to Jenna, before Jenna goes, I just wanted to say it's going to be a little different for Von with that oil change, because he had the last one when he was, 25? This time he's like Jenna's age when he's having this.
It's true.
He's older than me. He's an old man.
He's an old man, isn't it? It's crazy. I was telling somebody this week, and this woman's an older woman, and she doesn't follow football. And I said to the guy, well, that guy's older. And she looked at me and I go, well, he's like 32. And in the real world, they're like 32. I'm like, the NFL.
Yeah. The NFL, that's old.
That's old.
Especially be getting an oil change.
That's it.
But I hear what you're saying. And you talk about position groups and other things. I mean, Beane has some big decisions to make about Tremaine Edmonds.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Edmonds, we can all agree that he had one of his best seasons. Is he still young?
Yes.
Or is he now old?
Well, you know where he is? He's young for a guy going into a second deal, which might, am I right, Dan? The second deal might end still before he's 30, right?
Correct.
Depending on what they give him.
Yeah.
Well, that's where in the NFL, let's be honest, NFL people are looking at that. He's been a pretty healthy player. He's been a very consistent player, however you want to judge that. And he's still on the younger side. He didn't start in the NFL at 24. He's there now. So, or whatever it is. So,
crazy,
yeah, I'd say we joke about it. But for him and his agent, he's young right now.
Yeah. So what do you do, Dan?
I think the message, and like, this is, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I think that if they wanted to get something done, they would have gotten it done by now. And I think especially the way that Tremaine played this year, I joked that they were hoping that Tremaine would have an all-pro season so that he would price himself out of it, or they could use the price as their excuse to why not to bring him back because the salary cap isn't real. But the fact is that I think that if they would have wanted to keep him around, I think they would have found a way to get something done beforehand. I don't think they would have let this contract. That'll be telling to see what Ed Oliver does, because both of those guys, I love how when I start talking, both you guys just look down. And I hope people notice that in the comments.
I'm looking for something to add to what you're saying here. So
it was just funny.
Okay.
I was like,
you want to know what I'm looking at? The New York Times sent an article about, I follow the New York Times cooking, and it says the miracle of crispy cheese. So,
but it's so funny because I'm sure a lot of people are like, Dan's talking. All right, we'll just go back down to like, the viewers are like, we'll pick this back up when Mike and Jenna start talking again. But I just think that if they would have wanted to get something done, they get it done. I think another team comes out there and offers a big contract for Tremaine, which he's earned.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. This is a seminal moment for them in terms of Tremaine, because of the other issues they have with, we can say the cap is not real because you can work around it. Well, this is one of the ways you work around it, where you don't give a big contract if you decide. Terrell Bernard ready to be a starter in this league?
That's what I know. That's how I feel, where I'm like,
this is where, like, again, maybe he is, but you'd think you would have seen him on the field more. But that being said, maybe there's something else they do, because there are going to be players out there that you can sign for lesser money, smaller contracts, and you spend your money in other places. because there is a part where he's got to make a call on this. But this is a guy they drafted with Bean's first pick. It's first 2 picks. It's Josh and it's Tremaine. Jenna, we always talk about being there, and it was crazy to see the 2 of them. And he's almost done. He's done about 90% of what you would have hoped he would have done.
Yeah.
Great locker room, great everything. He does everything. He's very well respected. He's the kind of guy you probably should find a way to keep. And they might still do that, but it's a lot of money and it's a commitment. And you drafted a guy relatively high, at least with the thought that maybe he's a guy ready to step in. And I would have liked to have seen some more moments of him more than AJ Klein getting those snaps at different times.
This to me is like the crux of like how challenging it's going to be this offseason for Bean, because you have big decisions to make about guys, but also it's like you could allocate that money in a lot of other ways. But you talk about what a middle linebacker is to Sean McDermott and like this defense and all of these things where you're like, and he's had a lot of time in the system. And
the franchise tag is almost out of the picture because he gets lumped in with everybody else. It's too much money in 1 year.
Yeah.
I don't see any way they put the tag on him.
Like, that's the thing, Dan, you said like, oh, I think this deal, if it were to get done, would have already gotten done. And I hear you on that, but I really feel like Brandon Bean is like letting the hourglass like go through of just like there's so many decisions to make. How do we make one here?
I agree with you there. And I think he's hoping that there's some team that comes and offers him a big check and he can go, good. We couldn't match that even if we wanted to. And we can move on. And it's kind of like, we didn't have to say we didn't want him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think he's as concerned about to have to say we didn't want him, because once you allow the guy to go into free agency, I mean, we're not, there could be some negotiating going on. I'm sure there's something, but to Dan's point, they had time to do that. I think if he gets into free agency, then their plan was to not sign him.
What about this too? You guys talk about middle linebackers and how important they are. Is Terrell Bernard ready to step up? Can Milano play middle? I mean, the Bills really only go out there with 2 linebackers. So can you find another kind of outside linebacker?
You got small linebackers if that's your 2.
I know. But Milano showed me a lot this year as well in his run stopping ability. Like, he wasn't just this coverage guy that he was all over the place blitzing. He blitzed more than Tremaine did. Like, he was all over the place. So, and I go back to this, linebackers and running backs seem to be the position where you not necessarily save money, but it's like you take the 2-3 year flyers, 2-3 year deals. Hey, let's hope this guy has a good year or 2, and then we're good. And I don't see the Bills really giving a 4-5 year deal to any linebacker / running back.
Yeah, even they did draft him. They did draft him 18th overall in the first round. So, their thought was he's a franchise type piece for them. Yeah. So, because it starts with Poyer. I've never seen, I said this before, I've never seen a guy have a year like he did, where he fought through everything. Never, ever covering this team, seen a guy do that. But I think it's going to lead to him playing for another team. And because I believe they think Hyde is coming back, obviously, and maybe Christian Bernard ends up being Benford. I always want to say that. It sounds better. He should switch his last name. Christian Benford goes to safety, or at least an opportunity to play there next to him, because I think he's physically could do that. It'd be great to see him on the field. That all of a sudden makes your draft class look better if he's there and you got Elam on the other side and, you make those moves. But I think you make that move and somebody's going to pay Poyer, because it's going to be a relatively shorter deal, but that's going to be a good team that pays Jordan Poyer. That's going to be a playoff team that pays him.
Yeah.
The Miami Dolphins, even though, they have a safety, but there are teams that would. But then you start making those moves, right? And you start looking around as to how you're going to do things. And they're going to, by the way, you see the cap, they're already going to do some stuff. They're going to do something with Josh's contract where they can make a change in it. So there's some moves they'll make to free up space. But unfortunately, I think Poyer is going to go.
I think a safety position is the number one thing that needs to be addressed for this Bills offseason, even more than Tremaine, even more than another linebacker. Yeah, I just think, especially if you're going to keep Leslie Frazier around in the Sean McDermott system, they have built it back to front. I just think it is so crucial to have not necessarily a veteran, but somebody that has played a lot of snaps, knows what they're doing back there to go along with Hyde, because I just think that that's such a crucial focal point of lining up for the defense, everything that they did. Think about all the things that Poyer did. And I know that Tremaine did a lot of things too, but I just think the MVP or, most valuable of that defense, I think it's the safeties are a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So does that lead you to believe that they will resign Poyer because they need that, or no? Okay.
No, because it was funny. I was just looking at it too. It's just trying to see, like, Jesse Bates from Cincinnati is a really good safety, and he's going into free agency. And I was like, what would he be like? And he's probably going to get the same kind of length, same kind of money as Poyer, top 5 safety money. But it's funny but Jesse Bates is 25 years old. So like you can sign him to a 5-year deal. It's really a 3-year deal. And you kind of were able to work around it, because I think that, again, the focal point of that defense, I think you're willing to spend more money on a safety, in my opinion, than I would be at a middle linebacker.
Yeah. It's interesting. That is a good point. And especially with Hyde getting older as well, coming off an injury, like it would be nice to have a younger piece there that could kind of rely on Hyde. And then as Hyde, gets older, he becomes a free agent. You could have somebody already in the system who has that experience of what you want and bring in someone else. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It is interesting because you like Mike said, like you could not have asked Jordan Poyer to do more for this team this year. And I hope he gets a lot of money because he obviously put it all out there. So, and I don't think that's with the Bills because of where they're at and what they need to do and how many moves they need to make. But
yeah,
I remember in OTAs when Jordan Poyer didn't show up to voluntary minicamp and people were saying that he was a bad teammate. Remember the comments of just shut up and play. You signed your contract. And then he played through literally everything this year and was, besides Milano, their most important player. They only lost 1 game with him on the field. I just wanted to sprinkle that in.
Remind people of the pencil that these contracts are written in when guys are in the last year of their deals. And he was an important player to this team, which is why they let it play out the way that it did. And his age was what kept them from signing him. But the last year of the deal, like they're not cutting Gabe Davis, but look at Gabe Davis's contract going into the final year where he was drafted. You can move on from players in those circumstances. They're not cutting Gabe Davis. I'm just saying that's the way the NFL works. And we said at the beginning about a step back. I think they've taken a step back as a franchise. They all have. Because it's funny, I listen to people now talk about, because it's become when it was Mahomes and Allen and the Bills and the Chiefs, and now obviously the Bengals have moved ahead of that. But Jenna, I think it's a good thing, mindset-wise, that they've taken, the perception is they've taken a step back. Get a little pissed off, approach the offseason with, we need to make these moves, get back a little bit of that underdog, which I think helps teams.
Yeah.
And look at the way they use it. But they're 3 of the top 2. People are talking about the Jaguars. Slow down on that. The Jaguars aren't there with them yet.
That's aggressive.
But they're behind the other 2, so figure out a way to get back.
They play the Bengals and the Chiefs and the Eagles next year. So that'll be something. But I get it. I mean, I think that being the underdog will be big for them. Because I think that
They've
has
earned
an
that.
edge. They have, which like, we all thought after 13 seconds, like this is going to be the year because of how motivated they are because of that. But I think anointing them Super Bowl favorites, which I understand why that was the case, but I think maybe it made them blind to the weaknesses in the roster, because I feel like over time it's like, oh, well, these guys always get better, when that's not. We know that's not how it always
I blame
works.
Dan and his gambling buddies because they were favorites at Kansas City and favorites at Cincinnati. I mean, seriously, Dan, what are you guys doing?
I don't know. That Cincinnati game was so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Tom Brady retired
Yeah.
Psych.
again.
What if he pulls another psych?
Oh, he's
No, there's
he
no
can't.
way.
Okay, it's weird that he did it on the same day. That's not weird to anybody else.
No, this was the same. No, he retired last year on my birthday.
Rumors
Yeah.
came out.
Oh, well, he didn't announce it then.
He posted on February 1st, both days. That's not a little.
I don't think that's that weird.
He's not doing what he did today and then coming back from it. I mean, he did the whole thing. Like,
Okay.
I'm
I
waiting
think
for the
he's done.
Instagram video of him and Gronk playing like the Jay-Z
Gronk's
song.
done too. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
No, think about it though. Like, was the juice worth the squeeze?
Yes.
No, this was
Yeah.
a terrible year for him.
It was a bad year.
His whole year was
Oh.
terrible. The crypto stuff, Giselle leaving him.
Oh, I thought you meant going to Tampa.
No, Tampa was good.
That,
He should
I mean, they
have,
won a Super Bowl.
could have
but-
bailed after the first year and just would have looked like, hey, just wave at Belichick as he goes away. But he's going to do that anyhow. But no, I think he and Gronk are both working for Fox now. I saw Gronk at, he's doing that horrendous pregame show that Fox puts on. And Gronk is by far the best one. He's the most alert one on the set. And I can say that because those guys are even older than me. Man, that's a rough show. But Gronk will do that pregame, do all his stuff, his terrible commercials, and Brady will be getting $50 billion a year from Fox to do the games.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about some bad announcers, and Romo, I wasn't great in that Bills-Bengals game. Greg Olson is phenomenal. Greg Olson.
Yeah, I feel
on
like you've
Fox.
heard people talk about that more. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
Romo doesn't bother me as much. I don't also hear him every week because when I'm on the field, obviously I
Yeah.
don't hear him and all that
But-
stuff. But
Greg
In that
Olson has
Chiefs
been
Bengals
phenomenal
game,
on
there
that
was only-
A-team.
Huh?
Yeah.
Greg Olson has been phenomenal on that A-team for Fox.
He's really good at both analyzing the play and saying it in the right way. And by the way, speaking of Romo, Joey Molinaro, is that how
Oh,
it's
yeah.
pronounced? He does great stuff. He's great at his voices. He does Romo voices in doing a game. If you get a chance to say it, Dan, you're better at it. He's great, but I'd rather hear Dan doing it. I don't know, Jim.
I don't know, Jim.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that's everyone now is turning on Tony Romo, but I think it's fine. I like
He's,
it, like
he's
his
all over the
excitement.
map. When he's
It's the
doing it.
yelling. I agree. It's the yelling. It's not even the.
It's football.
But Dan, this is the same thing that happened with John Madden. John Madden was unique and he was different. And he was. And then he became like people would look at him like a caricature where he was just saying things like, they've got the ball, which means they got over the line. And you know what that is? That's a touchdown. Like, and he kind of did say stuff like that, but it was cool the way
Yeah.
he did it for a while. And then it was people, saying that's all he says. So
And
You're
look, Brady's
John
got a
Madden
great
hater.
What?
Said, are you a John Madden hater?
me?
I'm kidding. I'm
Oh.
kidding. But you know how that's how the internet works.
Oh, that's right. Yes. You're a
But I
hater.
go, I also don't think that we can automatically pencil in Brady, who has shown that he has a great personality, understands social media, all of those things. It is not easy to just go in the booth. If there is one thing that we have learned, it is not that
Yeah.
easy to transition. Drew Brees was horrendous at it. Tony Dungy is pathetic at it. Like Jason Garrett is awful. Like
But,
go
but you
through
could
the
have
list
predicted that all of them were all.
Yeah,
They're all
that's
awful.
not shocking to me.
They're awful. Romo has a personality, but Brady does have one. Like
Yeah.
he has a personality, and we saw it. He kept it mostly under wraps for 20 years, but
Isn't
I
that
think he could be good at it. But he's got to let go a little bit, and I think a partner matters. Kevin Burkhardt is really good.
phenomenal.
Yeah, at the
Yeah.
number one team. So
Yeah, I agree. Wow, I didn't know you were a big Greg Olson fan, Dan.
Big
Good
Greg
Dan.
Olson guy. He was great. And again, Mike, like you're saying, he does the X's and O's and breaks down like what you think is going to happen. But then he also gives you that insight of like just recently being on the sidelines and recently being in a huddle. Like to be like
absolutely.
this, hey, right now you're thinking this and you're going, holy cow, what's going on? And like just a really nice balance. If you haven't heard him or noticed
Yeah.
him, he's just really well done.
He had a great line in the Eagles-Niners game, and I was watching. He was showing Fred Warner, who's a great linebacker, and his line was he got frozen on the play because he wasn't sure what they were going to do, and he said, "That's how you turn a 4-3 linebacker into a 4-7 linebacker." And I thought, wow, that's really like because you just get him to stop for a second. That's a quick way of anybody who's paying attention goes,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, this guy can run," but you made him wait.
Slower.
And I thought
Yep.
that's a good way to express it in a quick way, like you have to do in the NFL.
Yep.
Of letting people know what's happening.
Yeah. I like Greg Olson. I'm still just, I don't know, Romo. I don't know, Jim. I also don't listen to him every week, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything you guys want to add? Gentlemen.
No,
Can't
but
wait to-
the off season started too soon.
Yeah.
You know, we got
Trash.
our cups, we got our stuff, we got our merch, we got
I
all
can't wait to
that.
see Josh on the course this weekend.
Yes.
Yeah, Josh
and,
not going to the Pro Bowl.
And we'll be Dan and I'll
Oh.
be heading to Combine
Yes.
this year. Yeah. So that's when we'll get a chance to hear from Bean and McDermott. It'll be an interesting time when we
Yeah.
hear from him there.
Yeah. All right, cool. Please be sure to like, comment. Comment what you think the biggest need the Bills need to address in the off season, as well as subscribe. I was getting there, folks. Mike and
Yeah.
Dan are staring at me.
You were delayed.
Yeah. Turn a 4-3 into a 4-7.
7.
Like a 4-3 host into a 4-7 host.
Okay. What? Oh, a host.
Yeah. She's the host.
All right. Thanks for joining us on Buffalo Plus. For Mike and Dan, I am Jenna. We'll catch you next time here on Buffalo Plus.